When I started this build, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But I had a box full of minis and a Cavalier Disposition toward historical dioramas, which means it could go anywhere. As is the case with many of my dioramas, I expected this one to go in the direction of a monster encounter. Much like my World War II giant python diorama that I did a few months ago. But this time I was working with Russian World War II infantry, which meant that a giant python would not be realistic. In spite of a lack of any obvious opponents to pit these World War II Russian soldiers against, I pressed on in completing them, filling their backs and sides with gear, their heads with helmets, and their hands with weapons that I know very well from all of my days playing Medal of Honor.
Пистолет-пулемет Шпагина.
And with that, the assembly of the crew was done, but because of this goofy little cut that I did a minute ago, and a phone call I was on while assembling these guys, I actually lost track of all the body parts and where they went, leading to a collection of minis in poses that were not necessarily intended for them. Because of that, a few of the soldiers ended up in positions looking like they were cowering in the face of some terrifying enemy. And what's more terrifying when you're out with the bros than getting jump scared by a creeper? I'll have the creeper standing on this side of the base, and he will be way oversized and glowing. The base that I'm working with was a little too thick for my idea, so I took it off camera and I sliced a section out of the middle. I then used some wood glue and clamps to bring those two ends together again. Another reason I decided on a creeper is because, obviously, the Minecraft movie came out recently, so there is quite a bit of hype surrounding it. I haven't seen it yet, and I've heard mixed reviews, but if you've seen it, let me know in the comments if you think it's worth watching or not. I used to play Minecraft a lot back in like 2013 through 2015, and I was never really into survival mode, but I made some pretty fun stuff in creative mode. It kind of felt like building dioramas. In fact, the main threads of creativity for world building purposes in my life are probably Lego, then Minecraft, and now dioramas. They all kind of give an ability to express creativity in a very similar way. After shaving the foam, I sanded the sides to get rid of the seams, and the next step was to make some blocks. I decided it would be fun to have some contrast between a more realistic looking landscape where the soldiers are and an 8-bit Minecraft landscape where the creeper is. With the width of the cut on the hot wire table set to the same thickness as the foam, I began slicing sticks that were square from one angle, which I could then turn into cubes. And I made way more cubes than I needed. With a nice big pile of blocks, I could put away the hot wire table and begin stacking said blocks. I started dry fitting the blocks in place and decided it would look better to cut a bit of the landscape away on the bottom layer to just give a little more dimension to this side. So I drew up a grid pattern that matched the size of the blocks, and I cut away those with my hobby blade. With all the cubes from the bottom layer removed that I wanted removed, I could then start stacking the blocks on top. To imply the transition between the Minecraft biome and the realistic biome, I peeled away some bits of the blocks that were on the ends closest to the soldiers. With that done, and before it got too difficult, I cut away a spot for my switch. I've run into issues in the past where I have had to carve this out with everything on top, either breaking things or having to take way too long because I'm being so careful, but doing it now will make everything easier later on. I also glued the battery housing in place and then gave the ground on the right side of the diorama some unevenness with a butane torch. For my ground texture, I decided to just go with mud effects from Vallejo. Usually I'd mix up some form of terrain paste here, but I'm pretty happy with how this looks right now. Additionally, I mixed up some paint and Mod Podge to protect the foam on the other side. With all of the pink surfaces covered, it was time to let that dry and start making my creeper. I decided I wanted the creeper to be glowing, prepping to explode, so I went with a material that would allow light to pass through, which will make the effect cooler, but acrylic is harder to work with than foam. Not sure why I grabbed this little soldier for reference, because I completely disregarded any semblance of an attempt to make this creeper scale accurate. Had I made this creeper to scale, I don't think it would have been terrifying enough for all of these soldiers to be cowering the way they are. But with this being more of a Tsar Bomba creeper, I think that the response is a little more justified. That is also assuming that all of these soldiers are already aware of a creeper and what a creeper does, which means that they would have played Minecraft. Like I said, a Cavalier disposition toward historical dioramas. After this nuclear creeper had its legs, the next step was to prime it, and obviously I didn't want to lose the translucency, so I gave it a coat of matte varnish, which does a great job of holding paint. And speaking of paint, it was time to flip the hobby mat over to the messy side and break out the airbrush. I used a green contrast paint from Citadel because it has a nice transparency to it. After the second coat had dried, the green was nice and solid. Then I decided to move over to the soldiers and come back to the creeper later. Painting all of the soldiers side by side like this will dramatically speed up the painting process, and it works because all of them have the same colors, which is nice. After they had been put on their painting base, I primed them black and then began adding the base layers with the airbrush as well. I'll be cleaning up all of the remaining details with a brush later on. For all of the elements on the minis that were a different shade of khaki, I used washes and glazes to get them to the correct hue. And I say correct with a little bit of a disclaimer because military uniform people are very particular about their military uniforms. I then took a little break from painting the soldiers to get the creeper figured out. I decided instead of painstakingly painting every single square on this creeper's skin, that I could just take some measurements and use some water decals. I printed the creeper's skin on some decal paper, and at this point the ink would have come right off in the water, but a coat of matte varnish should solve that problem. And I've already made a mistake, now that I know, with these decals. If you know the problem, let me know in the comments, but it will become apparent in a minute. I set the decals aside for the varnish to dry, and I got back to painting the minis. All the base coats had been established by the airbrush, and now it was just a matter of picking out the highlights. These guys already had it rough, having to fight on the eastern front. Now, they have to face off against giant creepers. It's a real bummer. After the soldiers, it was time to get back to the creeper and the water decals. And if you didn't know this already, like I didn't at this point, you can't print brighter than the white backing on your paper, which is obvious to me now, but because of that, the decals will only darken whatever they go on top of, or tint it. So in this case, I should have gone with a white or a much lighter green base coat. Even if it is a little dark, I think the creeper turned out pretty good. And once it has some light shining from within it, it will look even better. And overall, it's a good learning experience, and I'm very happy to have discovered how to use homemade decals. With that done, it was time to add the lights. I put a nice bright green filament in the head as well as one in the body, ran the wires all the way down through the legs. And if you're watching this and you're somehow unfamiliar with the way that creepers work, when creepers start to glow, it means they are about to self-destruct. I went a little out of order per my usual workflow for this video, but now it was time to wrap up the terrain. And like I said before, I wanted this to be a meeting of two biomes, one realistic and one Minecraft. After picking up some grassy dirt blocks, it was time to apply some more realistic grass on the other side. I tinted the dirt a little bit more like dirt, and then I applied my static tack a little bit splotchily all over the right side of the base, followed of course by the applicator. Once the base had been thoroughly grassed, it was time to add the creeper. I drilled a hole where the wires will go through, and I glued the creeper in place. And as I continue to look at this creeper, I'm glad that there will be a light inside, because if there wasn't, I would definitely have to remake it, or at least repaint it. The next step was to wrap up the wiring, and the second to last step, before completing this goofy diorama, was to glue the comrades in place. And if you're going to go, it's always better to go together. And the very last step was to clean up the sides of the diorama with black 4.0. And after that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.